Hi again. This lecture is going to focus on how you should approach your major project in the research and writing phase of the major assessment. So at this stage you will have decided on which grant application you would like to pursue in your groups. You will have done some early project management for the major assessment that is in the form of the first assignment. So you've already proposed your project and you've received some preliminary feedback from me and your tutor. And now I would encourage you to reflect on the feedback that you've received and think about what amendments need to be made to ensure that the project adheres to or responds to the selection criteria, and that also ensures that you have really tight aims, really tight outcomes, that the project is feasible, and that you have thought about the implications behind the project and how your project is about learning, communication, and identity. Okay, so this lecture is researching and writing your major project. I'm first going to unpack and remind you of those assessment outcomes because they are key when thinking about writing and researching your grant application. I'll also talk to you about formatting and addressing the sections in your major project, and also a little note on group work. So the assessment outcomes for the major project are that you are required to research a topic by collecting, analysing and interpreting data. So the major project is really about the research about the place that you want to go to, whether that is somewhere in Asia for the AsiaLink residency or in Antarctica. So doing as much research as you can about the actual place that you're going to, because your grant application, the focus of the grant application should really be about the project when you are at that location. So doing as much research about that location, the better. But also to be able to analyse it as well, and analyse the implications behind your project and the effects of the project potentially. I want you to research express your research findings and ideas coherently and logically. That's going to happen in the form of the grant application. Plan, formulate, prepare and communicate a major project. Again, that comes in the grant application, where you have to clearly communicate what your project is, how you're going to plan it, how you're going to formulate it, and how you're going to communicate the findings and communicate your experiences. That might be through dance, song, it might be through storytelling, it might be making videos, it might be creating a documentary or a photo exhibition. You're also going to formulate, express and defend an argument. So part of the grant application is that you are asked to tell us what is so special about your project, why it's important to do a project like the one that you're doing at your location rather than somewhere else. And through this whole process, part of the assessment outcomes is that you will understand a grant process. So when researching your topic by collecting, analysing and interpreting data, make sure that all data is used to help support your project. There's no point in using additional statistics if it's not actually applicable to the project. So don't think that you need to put extra data in just because that's what it looks like you should do. Make it meaningful to your project. Additional or superfluous data does not strengthen your argument. Adding some statistics or data is enough evidence to show that you've actually analysed your material as well. That's important. So rather than just putting statistics in, I want to see why it's meaningful to you and your project. When expressing research findings and ideas coherently and logically, don't leave any room for questions to be asked, such as, how will stage A of the project occur? What are the benefits of the project? Hasn't someone already done this before? How is this different? So it's really important that you ask those kinds of questions yourself and that you answer them in your grant application. And this is a part of planning a major project. When planning, formulating, preparing and communicating your major project, remember that the project must be viable, involve only the applicants, i.e. that's you. You are the ones who are proposing to go to Antarctica and do a major project, research project. Or you are proposing to go to Taiwan or Singapore or somewhere in Japan and undergo a intercultural communication experience. You are not orchestrating other people to do the project for you. Remember in a previous lecture I mentioned when some students want to have a Beyonce concert. And aside from the fact that that is not very viable, they're also getting Beyonce to do the project for them. You are not just managing a project for other people. You are front and center of that project and that experience. So when planning, formulating, preparing, communicating a major project, make sure that you convince your reader by selling your project to them through your research and your justification. Write in an active voice and not a passive voice. So rather than jazzing up your poster and making it look like an advertisement, I'm more interested in what your project is about, how you're going to be involved, what you're going to learn about, how there is a meaningful exchange of ideas and experiences, etc. Show that your project is planned out, so there's logistics, locations, transport, equipment, outcomes, even timelines if that's necessary. So plan the project. Try not to be vague about the details. When thinking about formulating, expressing and defending an argument, your defence is in your grant application. Do not just communicate what the project is and how it's unfold, but I'm really interested in knowing why. Why is it important that you go to this place? What are you going to learn? What is so unique about the project? I.e., do the facets connect tightly with selection criteria? Does it connect to media and communication theory, which is what you're studying in your unit or in your degree? So the main sections of your grant application, I'm going to touch base on, but because your project is inherently unique, it's fine for you to have other sections, but what is important is that you do at least include the areas that I'm talking about. So you have a project title. Ensure that your project is clear, accurate and appropriate for the project that communicates what the project is about, and keep it free from abbreviations and jargon. When thinking about the selection criteria, remember that for Antarctica, the fellowship aims at fostering understanding of the Antarctic environment and communicate that significance. So what is it that you're trying to understand about Antarctica? Is it just Antarctica as a whole? That's a little bit too broad. Maybe you want to hone in and refine. You're only going to know how to do that once you do more research about Antarctica. And communicate a significance between Antarctica and Hong Kong. You're going to communicate this experience through various media, including but not limited to the visual arts, filmmaking, research, writing, digital media, and music. The fellowship is also open to research and innovation in the fields of history, media studies, communications, anthropology, and philosophy. And I've highlighted the areas there that might be more applicable to you guys. So keep in mind that for Antarctica, it's really important that you use media, various media, to maybe record your experiences or disseminate your experiences. So if you've decided to do the Antarctica grant application, I'd like to ask you these questions. Are you communicating through various media? Are you using media just for the sake of it, or is it central to the project's aims? The latter is a lot more preferable because it's not, it's a lot more engaged and a lot more well thought out. Does your project contribute to research and innovation in the fields of history, media studies, communication, anthropology, or philosophy? You will need to have a project that does one of those or answers to one of those areas because that's part of the selection criteria. Have other projects like yours existed before? If so, how is your project unique? You're going to need to justify that in the selection criteria. Now, if you're doing the AsiaLink grant application, remember that AsiaLink's Arts Residency Program has provided professional development opportunities for arts professionals, that's you, working in and across art forms in exchange for sharing of skills, knowledge and networks with a local host community. So AsiaLink Arts Residencies are innovative, they're flexible and supportive, and they are grounded in personal and enduring relationships. In other words, you're not just going to another place, coming back and never thinking about it ever again. There needs to be enduring relationships, and cross-cultural dialogue. So, as I say here, the program promotes sustained cross-cultural dialogue by facilitating reciprocal residencies and trialling new models of engagement. Be experimental, be creative. Think about how you can communicate to another community that you don't know very well in ways that people haven't done before. That's a really exciting prospect. So when answering the selection criteria for the AsiaLink residency, I'd like to ask you, is your grant application nurturing professional development opportunities? How are you going to implement that and make that front and centre of your project? Are you promoting cross-cultural dialogue that is sustainable? Are you trialling new models of engagement, or are you just engaging in traditional and conservative ways? Here I'd really like you to push the boundaries and think outside the box and think about how people can communicate in all sorts of ways beyond the normal everyday standards. So when thinking about the titles and headings of your project, more titles don't necessarily make you look more organised. So you might want to eliminate extra titles. Do not double up on information in your 2,500 word grant application because it will look like a weaker project. Eliminate unnecessary subheadings and make sure to streamline the narrative of your grant application. Now moving on to aims, be clear and assertive with the aims of the project and why you are applying for it to be executed. Do not leave the aims last. Your aims should really be the overarching kind of front and centre aspect of your project. Always start with the aims and make sure that you eliminate unnecessary words like essentially, virtually, or in other words, and that happens a lot in the grant applications. Now in tackling that background information, a strong background study shows evidence of research, and we, the teaching staff, are really looking for evidence of research, not just in the area or the population or the geography, but of past projects in the location and also similar projects elsewhere. Demonstrating your research, I guarantee you, will strengthen your proposal. Clearly state why this project should go ahead and how it is differentiated from other projects and contexts, because that's also showing that you've done research about them. Do not write sweeping statements or give broad information. The more you're able to show a sensitivity of the place that you're going to, and if you're doing the AsiaLink residency, the culture that you're going to, the less sweeping statements you're going to be inclined to make. Try to be as specific as possible in all areas. This section acts as a justification for any creative or non-creative grant application. Now, when thinking about your methodology, if you're learning about an area, exchanging information, or creating an artwork that responds to a new experience, how are you going to gather information? It's a really important part, especially of the AsiaLink residency. How are you going to analyse the results and what is the output? You're going to have answers for these areas. How will the project be facilitated? How will it be delegated and monitored and reviewed? So these are questions that you should answer when undergoing the preliminary project management phase of writing the grant application. I encourage you, be bold, be creative. This is a really fun project. You could hypothesize about doing all sorts of things and engaging with all sorts of people and cultures and places, and it is a really, really great opportunity. So both of these grant application assessments are modelled on pre-existing grant applications. So you could, feasibly have a grant application that is disseminated in Hong Kong and do something similar, and you would have already had practice in writing grant applications because of this assessment. Now I want to give a little note on spelling and grammar for your grant application. Make sure that you're clear and concise, because the more clear and concise you are, inevitably the more eloquent you're going to be. Do not hype up your language and try to generate energy, persuade or sell your project. Be thorough with your details and the justification of the project. Make sure that you delete unnecessary words and tautologies, and I've got some examples here. In other words, or you could just say those other words. We live in a digital world. Essentially, the participants will take turns one after another. The more you cut back on that superfluous language, the more room you've got to actually focus on your project. Now, when working on a document together, there's a lot of project management that is involved. You might want to have teams, so teams researching on the background and others doing the aims and objectives, or the actual logistics of the actual project. How you divide up the work is completely up to you, but just be mindful that sometimes it's difficult working in groups and also having to write on one document. Maybe you'll use a Google Docs, I'm not sure. Keep in mind that the advice and guidance given by your tutor during the tutorials, so make sure that you set up a hierarchy in your group, plan how you're going to work with each other, and sort out the sections for each member to perform an equal amount of duties. Great, so that's all for this little mini lecture. I hope that breaks down how you need to pay attention to the selection criteria and how you can ensure that your grant application adheres to all of the assessment outcomes as well. It's a really fun project. Again, I really encourage you to think outside the box and think about communication in all sorts of ways and experiment with the media that you have at hand in order to learn about a new place, communicate with people, and disseminate your findings. Great. Thank you very much. See you next time.